that process. Thank you. We will provide some examples of housing needs assessments that we've done here in the Valley, and how technical assistance can be requested if you're interested in going through that process and doing a housing assessment. And we will discuss the benefits of these assessments and how they inform long-range plans and some of the recommendations you can expect to get from these reports. If you have questions, please feel free to use the hand raise function, or we don't really have too many people here, so if you would like to just interrupt, you can do that as well. So here are some basic Zoom instructions. Audio participants, this is where you'll be able to find the hand raise function. Chat, you can enter some chats. Here is where under the participants you can find the hand raise if you do have a question. All right, so let's get started here. So housing needs assessments. I had this a little further down in the presentation, but I figured I'd move it right up to the top. In April, the governor signed a bill, Senate Bill 1162. And what this does is it requires municipalities over 30,000 to, beginning January 1st, 2025, so not that long from now, every 5 years, that jurisdiction must publish a housing needs assessment. And that's part A of this, that's subsection A. There's also a subsection B where same date, January 1st, 2025, is an annual report to the Arizona Department of Housing. And what these requirements, what's required here in subsection A, you're looking at every 5 years, a report where total population and total job growth projections for the subsequent 5 years is required. Then also the total amount of residentially zoned land. But not only that, it has to detail land zoned for single family and multifamily. So that differentiation has to be included in this report. Also, there'll be a total need of additional ownership and rental housing units needed to meet deficiencies in existing population and workforce, projected population and workforce, and any housing needs across various income levels. And the municipality, if they've done a housing needs assessment since January 1st, 2021, but any of those elements were not part of it, then it has to be, the existing report has to be amended to include those information categories. So a lot of the housing needs assessments that I've seen already include this information. It'll already include total population and job growth and a projection. The residentially zoned land detailing single family and multifamily may be in some, may not be in others. So that is something that might need to go, a city may need to go back and amend their report to include that. Existing population and workforce projection, projected population and job growth, housing needs across various incomes. Those are typically elements that are part of a housing needs assessment. So for subsection A, most of the existing reports that I've seen already have that information. For subsection B, this annual report, this is something new that I don't think most cities submit right now. So what this is including is proposed residential units submitted to the municipality, new residential housing units submitted to the municipality, and new residential housing units that are entitled, have been platted, have been issued a building permit, and have received a certificate of occupancy. So what it's asking for really is building permit information. And for that last part, and also planning, subdivision approvals, and submittals. So it's asking for housing that is already in process, but also housing that is just undergone the process. So has just come in for, say, a planning application, a subdivision application, things like that. And so this report also has to include the number of housing development applications received that prior year. So that goes back to um, the planning subdivision applications, the number of lots and multifamily units included in all development applications. So they're really focusing, they really want to get a number of an idea of how many multifamily units are going to be included in the next few years of development. The number of lots and multifamily units approved or disapproved. And they also want to know why, say, a development may have been denied at P&Z or City Council. They're looking for that information as well. And then a threshold percentage requirement of multifamily zoned land versus single family zoned land to meet the need of the population. So they're looking for a breakdown of total acreage, multifamily zoned versus single family zoned, and how that compares to the need that has been identified already. They're looking for a status and progress in meeting the municipality's housing needs. So they're looking for status on how, if there's a deficiency, how is it going to be addressed? And finally, for subsection B for this annual report, they're looking for a plan that specifies how municipalities intend to satisfy the identified need of additional housing units. So it's not only reporting the number of units and the number of acreage versus of multifamily and single family. If there are deficiencies, they're looking for how the municipality plans to address those deficiencies. So it's a pretty involved report, I think, for an annual report. So the 5-year report, that's going over long range 5-year estimates and need. This annual report is really digging deep into building permits, planning applications. If there are deficiencies there, then the jurisdiction has to come up with a plan to address those. So that starts January 1st, 2025. And of note here, tribal communities do not have to comply with SB 1162. And there were other portions of 1162, but this one, what we're really focusing on here is just the housing needs assessments itself. All right, so let's move on from that. So now that it's a requirement, let's get into the benefits of a housing needs assessment. A city is doing these, or they were doing them voluntarily. Let's look into what a city can get out of a housing needs assessment. So it's providing a snapshot into housing inventory. And if you had watched Peter's data presentation, which was great, a lot of this can be teased out of some of the data sets that Peter went through. So here we're looking at ownership versus rental. And within that ownership versus rental, there are so many categories that can be looked at. Cost per month versus current incomes. That will give you cost burden, how much of the population is cost burden compared to the population which is not. But then you can also look at how much of the population of renters is cost burden compared to owners. That's an interesting number to get into. Also, vacancy rates. Single family detached houses versus apartment complexes. What are the vacancy rates that we're seeing here? It provides a snapshot of detached versus attached units. The attached units could be not only, say, an apartment complex, it could be townhouses, could be duplexes, things like that. So it'll give you a snapshot of that. And it also we'll do a comparison between neighboring communities. So if we're doing a housing assessment for Tempe, we can look at how Tempe compares to Scottsdale or Phoenix, as far as ownership versus rental, vacancies, attached versus detached. We can look at different metrics and compare one city to another. And then ideally, what you're doing is you're identifying gaps in the housing stock. So if it turns out that there are way more attached units than detached, but the vacancy rate of those attached units is higher, then that's something that can be, identified as a recommendation or an implementation that can be addressed further in the housing needs assessment. So some other benefits of a housing assessment, it informs the general plan's housing element. So every general plan, there's a housing element. This is looking long range, 10 years, at how a city wants to grow. And the housing element is extremely important, especially now when we're facing housing shortages. So the housing assessment is important almost as a first step. If the city knows they're going to be doing a general plan update in the next few years, they may want to do a housing needs assessment first. This way, they have a lot of information already, and that can inform decisions and policy decisions, and recommendations for the general plan. It determines whether development decisions in the past have aligned with residents' needs. If there are if there have been decisions made in the past that a city wants to really focus on large apartment complexes, but that's not really what the residents of that community are looking for, or vice versa, single family detached, but that's not really what they're looking for. This housing needs assessment will identify those trends and gaps, and it supports informed decision making to formulate policies, regulations, and strategies that really meet the needs of residents of communities. It has opportunities to strengthen partnerships with stakeholders. So some stakeholders that we work with for housing needs assessments could be local business, the local business community, business owners. If a business is having a hard time retaining employees, a reason for that could be housing. An employee just can't find affordable housing within an acceptable, an acceptable range of commute times. So that's an important one. Schools are often a stakeholder that we engage with, as well as the public, residents. We want to hear from residents on how they think housing is impacting their community. Are there gaps in housing that they're seeing? Can they find adequate housing that's affordable and safe? Can their children find adequate housing close by? So those are all stakeholders that we like to engage with. And then public education and robust community engagement. We always have robust community engagement for housing needs assessments. We want to get out to farmers markets, community meetings, city council, P&Zs. We want to engage the public and get feedback. That's a large part of the learning process for us when we're working with communities. We want to hear from people who live in the community that are having either issues finding housing, or maybe they like things the way they are and they're concerned that things may change. That's also something that we get into with community meetings and public engagement. So that's a really important step for a housing needs assessment. And then some final steps or final benefits of a housing needs assessment is projections for future housing need. We will look at future population and workforce needs. This is one of the requirements for 1162 that cities will have to forecast that housing type and price point. That's not so much required in 1162, but it's something that we'd like to analyze and look at. So we'll look at workforce, future workforce and population, get an idea of the types of employment that in the next 5 years maybe coming online. And then we can do an analysis of salaries. And that's where you can look into the types of housing and price point that we can recommend to a city. And if there's a gap in certain price points based on workforce need and salary, we can make those recommendations to maybe strengthen one sector over another, or where the jurisdiction should focus on certain housing types rather than another. So that's also where the recommendations and implementations come into play. Policy recommendations to improve affordability and support development. We're going to see a lot of that, and also the second point, suggested revisions to land use and zoning regulations. We're going to see a lot of those two when we talk about House Bill 2720, which is accessory dwelling units, and House Bill 2721, which is middle housing, missing middle housing. I don't get into that too much here, but Ed is going to talk about that quite a bit in his afternoon session for model ordinances.
Yeah, and Robert, thank you. I wanted to jump in really quick because I wanted to kind of elaborate on what Robert was talking about the benefits to the community for these housing needs assessments. Some of the things that are really great from this is that a lot of communities, while they're so busy processing applications and processing the permits, the subdivisions that come in, a lot of times, especially when you look at the types of communities that are involved here, communities as small as 30,000 people are part of this mandate from the state level now to produce these needs assessments. But a lot of those smaller communities with efficient staffs, thin staffs that are wearing a lot of hats, don't have a lot of time normally to think about all of these things about their community. Like, how is the zoning performing? Do we have enough land zone for the types of residential desired to support the job mix, to all these different factors? And by doing this assessment, it can unearth a lot of valuable information to give you guidance on how you want to move forward in your communities to address the housing issues, and what types of housing might be necessary in order to support that. So while it is a new unfunded mandate, and while it does put a significant amount of research and details, Robert was indicating in those assessments can be very valuable in giving some insightful data for moving forward with some good policy directions that can guide how you interact with the development community, recommend rezoning changes, utilize PADs and the benefits that PADs and PUDs and PCDs and whatever term your community might use, or overlays to maximize housing for the residents of the community. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the afternoon session. So there's my little teaser if you'd like to come to it.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. That's all great information. All right, so let's move on from benefits and let's look at some components of a successful housing needs assessment. Demographic and socioeconomic profile. Hopefully you saw Peter's presentation and clicked on a few of the links that were posted in the chat. I mean, that data is amazing. What MAG has done with all their data, maps, graphs, charts. Yeah, it's amazing. When we start getting into technical assistance for these housing needs assessments, we'll be using that data to keep everything uniform throughout the region. So we're not using one data set for one city and then a different data set for a different city. This is going to be uniform data that everyone uses. We'll be looking at demographics, yeah, pretty much. I have a couple more slides on this, but pretty much every data set that Peter went through will be using. Housing stock analysis. This is also an important step in identifying need and gaps, rental, homeownership, affordability, and market analysis. These these inform us on affordability gaps. If a community is experiencing more cost burden than another neighboring community, we can look at what's going on there and come up with some recommendations how a city can address that current and forecasted need. We went through this a little bit, so we'll be looking at population increases, salaries, employment, and that's the forecasted. The current need will be that, and that's where community outreach comes into play. We can talk with people and get an idea of what their experience is finding housing, community engagement. Concurrently with this session, Celeste Werner is doing a community engagement session, which I guarantee is amazing, knowing her. So you'll definitely want to go back and find the recorded version of that, because she will have explanations of every type of community engagement we do, which is vast. Not only meetings, but we'll do focus groups, virtual meetings. We have surveys that we deploy. So all types of community engagement, and I have a few slides on that as well. And then finally, recommendations. We can put this report together, this assessment together, but if we're not giving any recommendations, then it's really just a snapshot of what's going on now and maybe some future present projections. But if we're not giving recommendations on how to move forward, how to correct some of the gaps that are identified, then it doesn't really accomplish anything. So that's where it's important for us to do the analysis, but then also come up with recommendations that will help the city progress.
And to reinforce that point, that's also what the statutory requirement wants you to do.
Yes.
Have those recommendations, have your plan of action, be able to assess it, and then move forward on it. And then really quick, I wanted to comment on a comment I saw in the chat, was that is the deadline January 1, or is this the deadline specified? The legislation takes effect on January 1, so you have a year to complete your needs assessment in 2025, and then you'll have to do that every year thereafter.
Yes.
So the deadline is going to be at the end of the year.
Yes, for the annual report.
For the annual report,
yeah,
correct.
for the 5-year report, it'll be 5 years after. All right, so data sources. I have a few slides here, but like I said, Peter went through this in great detail this morning. So if you're interested more in the data, maybe go back and rewatch that session. I'll click through a few here. But using the MAG Regional Analytics Division data, again, uniform data throughout the region is extremely important. We're going to be looking at population demographics, employment and workforce, and then regional long-range projections. And we can see here this population growth graph is showing from 1990 to 2060. So we have the capability to project out several years and see how population is going to increase, what workforce is going to be in several years. So this is important data, foundational data that we use for these reports. A couple of the screenshots here. This is looking at income. So Phoenix MSA reported income of $100,000 or more. And this is Phoenix compared to all of Arizona. And this is just a screenshot, but the ones that Peter went through this morning are interactive. So you can click on those. And there's also, I believe, reporting features. So with the interactive map itself, you can go through and click on jurisdictions and get this data by filtering through different reports, different tables. So this is important for us to use for these reports, but also for anyone who wants to is just curious about data and maps can access this information as well. And then GDP for Phoenix MSA, this is showing growth trends between 2017 and 2022. And significant, this is significant due to COVID-19, where there was a dip, but you can see annual growth returned in 21 and was dropped off in 22, but was still more than in 2020. So again, this is all data that we use for housing needs assessments to give us to give us a more complete picture of the community that we're working with. And it informs us on how we can formulate recommendations for housing. Because even though we're talking about GDP and salary here, it all contributes to housing. Like I mentioned earlier, if there's a large employer who's looking to move into a section of the valley, but there really isn't any housing nearby, that employer may go somewhere else, may go to a different community. So it's extremely important to address these issues if there are gaps and come up with policy or implementation recommendations that can help with addressing those. And then some more data that Sapna mentioned earlier in the presentation is Policy Map. So this is a subscription mapping service that is online based, and it'll be available for us in the communities to use to get even further into more detailed data. It's it has everything the MAG data portal has, but further. It's expanded, it's more detailed, it's presented in a little different ways sometimes. So this will all be available. This is a screenshot of the LA area. These are just some stock photos from the Policy Map website. But what's nice is here's also a map, an interactive map from Syracuse, looking at affordable housing units. And this is all interactive. So what's nice is you can specify your location, and you can filter through different data sets and come up with the type of data you're looking for, whether it be affordable housing units or housing within a certain price point, or which is affordable to certain levels of income. It's all available. So we can use this data to inform us even further. And here's an example, local example. So this is really just showing Glendale, the outline of Glendale. And when you have the subscription version of this, you can access the tables, trends, you can download information, you can create reports. So this will be valuable for us to use with all of the communities here, to create a more complete data profile of the communities that we're working with this technical assistance. And these next few are just some graphs that I found. This is a PDF that I was able to download, and this is of the Phoenix MSA area. But with the subscription, we'll be able to not only get the MSA, but the actual boundary of a city. So it'll be more detailed than what we're seeing here. And these are shares of households who rent, and these are trends from 2012, 17, and 22, looking at 3 different geographies. So we can get comparisons. When I talked about comparisons of neighboring communities, this is something that we could access to do those assessments. And then this one is rents. Peter touched on this, showing interactive charts showing rents of either under 500 or under 1,000. You can see that from 2017 to 2022, rents of both of these have really dropped off. So we're seeing a shortage of rents of $500 and less. Those are almost non-existent in several communities around the valley. And then under $1,000 is getting less and less every year. So this is something from Policy Map, and these are generalized, but we can get more specific for each community that we're working with. All right, getting into community engagement. Before I get into that, are there any questions?
Hi, Robert. This is Sapna. I just wanted to mention that Policy Map is indeed an incredible resource. However, our subscription does limit us to accessing the data and matrix. And so communities can submit the request to us for the data they might need. And that doesn't actually, they don't have to go through a request form for if they have a specific request. But for the housing needs assessment, et cetera, that access will be via Matrix and MAG.
Okay, yes, thank you for the clarification.
Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so let's get into community engagement. I have a few slides here. So this is very important for us to get some information from the community, and this will kind of explain how we reach out to the community to solicit that information. So we like to be inclusive. We like to engage as many constituents as possible, whether that's holding a meeting either virtually or in person, or maybe not even holding a meeting, maybe just getting out into the community at different events that are going on, whether it be a farmer's market, setting up a table, or for a recent general plan update that we did in Texas. In Socorro, Texas, there's an event called Socorro Sunday, where the community comes out and we set up a table there and informed residents who wanted to stop by and talk to us about it, informed them on the process, how it was going, the type of information we were gathering, what we and Socorro were going to do with that information. So that was very successful. Informative, we'd like to put out as much information as we can to educate citizens and decision makers, whether that be of the process itself, timelines, any issues that we're encountering, and solutions that will be presented. And then validating. We want to ensure that citizens and decision makers are heard, and they feel like that their voice is making a difference and is being heard. It's frustrating if you're asking people to come to a meeting and provide information, but then you don't come across as though you're actually using that information or those opinions. So we always like to make sure that the information we're gathering is used, and we make sure that people feel like they're part of the process. Some community engagement. Again, educate the community. If there's some information that could be corrected or is misunderstood about the process, we like to correct that from the start, because that if there's misinformation from the start, then that could inform the whole process in one direction or another. So we always like to educate the community on the process itself, like why are we doing a housing needs assessment? So we'd like to inform the community on why a process is happening, outcomes, and what they can expect throughout the process. Stakeholder engagement and communication. We always like to work with developers, property managers, residents, every step along the way for housing, whether it be developers or property managers. We need to get that input. We need to hear from developers, because if we are suggesting one housing type in a certain area, their input is very valuable, because maybe they have some insight that something in a certain area may not work so well, may not sell so well. They may have a hard time with funding. So working with developers and property managers is important for community engagement. and addressing concerns and questions in a safe space. This goes back to validating everyone's opinion. We don't want to be dismissive. That's frustrating for attendees, and it just invalidates the whole process for us. So we definitely like to address concerns and questions in a safe space. And we like to give the community an opportunity to be part of the process. I've been part of several community meetings with Matrix, and no matter the tone of the meeting from attendees, it's always great to get feedback and to hear what people are thinking about a certain process, and maybe correct some misinformation if that is an issue. But it's always great to give community members an opportunity to be part of the process. And then solutions, we will develop recommendations that support community needs and address concerns. We always want, with our recommendations, we always want to address concerns of citizens, stakeholders, members of focus groups. We always want to collaboratively come up with solutions. And some options that we use for community engagement. Again, I highly encourage you to watch Celeste's presentation on community engagement. She will go through many more of these. But project websites, we always like to start off with a project website. The ones that I've seen are typically hosted on a city's website, and we just populate it with information on the project itself. We like to have community feedback, so like a comment box on the website itself. So anytime anyone is on the website, they can submit a comment. It doesn't have to be during business hours. So that's important to be accommodating to people who are looking for information, who are on the website, so they can constantly send in feedback. Interactive functionality and questionnaires. Will often do surveys and questionnaires. That's important to get a feel for the situation on the ground. So questionnaires are important. We'll have a set of questions that people can answer and fill in comments to give us an idea of how they're feeling towards this project. And then, of course, project updates will have a timeline and major deliverables, things like that. Community meetings, like I said, we love to get out into the community and have community meetings to engage with residents and stakeholders. And then, of course, leading stakeholder and focus group meetings. This could be residents, developers, major employers, different departments of state departments. We've had meetings with Department of State Lands for certain meetings. So really reaching out to stakeholders and focus groups. All right, so some examples of findings. And these are random that I picked from several different studies, so should be random. So some major findings: existing affordable housing shortages are projected to grow through 2032. So if we see this as a finding, then a recommendation should definitely be, we need to look into how do we reverse this trend, whether it's through funding mechanisms, whether it's through different housing types. This is something that should be addressed in the short term. So hopefully by 2032, we could have addressed this issue. City is outpacing peer communities in terms of apartment construction. This could be if a community is more of a college town or has a younger population. We can see this. Over 8,000 unit storage exists for renters earning below 30% of AMI. So that's a fairly large shortfall. So that's something where we'll want to look into funding mechanisms to maybe make up that shortfall. And then zoning code restrictions for missing middle housing. I have a feeling that this is going to be addressed with the new legislation, House Bill 2721, that addresses missing middle housing. Cities are going to have to change their zoning codes, whether that's through model ordinance, whether that's through text amendments. So this one will be addressed if a city has found that their code is restricting different housing types. All right, some other findings, and we'll just kind of move quickly through these because I have a few more slides and I want to get to questions if there are any. The city's 2020 cost burden renter rate of 37% represented a decline from previous years. Renters earning 120% of AMI are facing nearly a 10,000 unit shortage. So that city will want to increase production to meet AMI at certain levels. It doesn't have to be 120. We could see this through several different levels of income. Seasonal vacation homes, vacancy rates were considerably higher than in this particular city than in Maricopa County. And then short-term rentals are more common in this certain community than in neighboring cities. That's an important one. That definitely eats into housing supply for longer term residents, whether longer term rentals or homeowners. And some just getting into some recommendations, expanding options for middle housing and ADUs that will be addressed here in the next couple of years through legislation, or has been addressed. Cities are going to have to implement those changes. Funding mechanisms, that's important for ADUs and low-income housing. We work with several different types of funding mechanisms. There'll be an afternoon session on financing that goes over several of those. Partnering with developers and nonprofits that can help expand housing options at certain income levels. Reducing barriers and incentivizing affordable housing. So then this kind of goes back to partnership developments and reducing regulatory barriers, whether those are zoning or any other barriers, those can be addressed. And this last one, lobbying elected officials. This kind of goes back to the short-term rental issue. If several cities are showing in a report that short-term rentals are having a detrimental effect on their housing supply, this can be brought to the attention of their representatives, and maybe those representatives can do something about certain state laws that address short-term rentals. So, all right. So switching topics a little bit, before I do this, are there any questions on the housing needs assessment portion? No? All right. So identifying parcels for redevelopment. This is a separate topic, but it still works into housing needs assessments. Oh, Sapna, I see a hand raised.
Yeah, hi, Robert. That's a question I wanted to ask, which was, how long does a housing needs assessment take? Specifically, kind of like the data analysis part, and then how long does it take to kind of disseminate the findings? I think it's just helpful in terms of if somebody were to apply for a housing needs assessment for them to have an idea of the timeline or
Yeah, that's
a community.
a great question. The typical timeline I've seen on projects I've been involved in and some proposals that we've been putting together lately is total from beginning to end 6 to 8 month process. The data analysis is usually the first, I want to say, third to half of the process. And then from there, we'll start formulating recommendations and working with community members, getting out into the community. That's spread throughout that 6 to 8 month timeline. We can meet with stakeholders and focus groups at the beginning and then check in midpoint get out into the community for certain meetings during the first quarter or half of the project, all the meanwhile going through the data analysis and collection and then formulating recommendations.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right, so identifying parcels. This can be mostly a GIS exercise. Depending on how large of an area we're talking about, you could get out and do like a windshield survey, drive through neighborhoods, get an idea of the area. But typically, this is a GIS exercise. And what we'll be doing is we'll be collecting GIS data, topographic information, floodplains, zoning, different real estate metrics that we can find. And what we're doing is we're adding all of this into a spatial model. And we want to set parameters for that model. So say we want to look at parcels of 1 acre and more. So we can set those parameters. Is there a building on these parcels? What's the age of the building? What's the condition? These are the types of things, data standards that we're looking for and that a spatial model can process. And then what it'll give us is it'll score parcels on the metrics that we're setting. High resolution imagery is extremely important so that we can verify that the parcels that the model has identified meet the certain criteria. And this will give us a list and a viewer of certain parcels that could be ready for either redevelopment if they're partially vacant or initial development if they're fully vacant. The results can be, a web-based mapping application that can be hosted on a city website. So it'll be easy to click on parcels, click on highlighted parcels, get that information, and really put a list together of which parcels are ready for redevelopment. And also we use something called ID Places. This is an in-house application that we've developed. And what you can do with this is anyone, if it's hosted on a city's website, anyone can zoom into an area and put these icons on parcels, and someone can highlight a parcel that's maybe near their house that they look at all the time. They're sick of looking at it because it's ugly. They can put a pin and say, this parcel, I think, is ready for redevelopment because it's vacant for 20 years. The building is old and dilapidated. So it's an interactive mapping tool that we get a lot of use out of for several different projects. So this could be a great one to use for identifying parcels for redevelopment. So rather than us through a technical assistance grant doing this for a community, this can engage the community so that they can be part of that process to identify the parcels that they see that could be redeveloped. All right, and that is all I have for parcel redevelopment and housing needs assessments. Here are some QR codes for the Home Technical Assistance webpage posted on the MAG website, and also the post-event survey that we would encourage you all to take. And if there are any questions or discussion points, feel free to bring them up.
I've also posted the link in the chat
Thank you.
to that webpage that has the request form and more detailed definitions or descriptions of the different topics, including the housing study and identifying parcels for redevelopment. Thank you so much, Robert and Ed. This is a comprehensive overview. It's a tremendous amount of information, as well as it covers all the different topics. So yeah, any questions? review or any points that you want to revisit that Robert and Ed made? It is a lot of information.
It is.
And we can hang out for a couple of minutes in case more questions come up, or we can also give back a little bit of time to our participants. This was a really helpful and comprehensive breakout session. So thank you to both of you. And just wanted to add that access for the participants, feel free to access the request form, as well as reach out to us and to Robert and Ed. And actually, Robert and Ed, you can put your email addresses in there. Though we do request for technical assistance to please reach out to us via the form. And then we will be interfacing with our fabulous experts at Matrix Design Group, as well as interfacing also with Policy Map. And in terms of the next steps for this event, we're going to have a break starting at noon to 12:30. You can either feel free to, well, we can leave the breakout session and rejoin the plenary session. But we look forward to seeing everybody for our afternoon plenary session. You will hear from Gabe Jaramillo at Vitalist, Renee Guillen from the League of Arizona Cities and Towns, Terry Bonelli, the Executive Director at LISC, and Amber Starr at the Arizona Community Foundation. They're going to be talking about the exciting programs that they have. As we all know, the cities and towns and tribal communities working on growing and preserving attainable housing takes a lot of different angles, and these community partners will also talk about how they have programs in place to help you as well as your community partners. And yes, thank you, Roxanne, for the question. The slides will be posted on the page that I just posted on the Housing Opportunities and Mentorship Education MAG webpage. We will post the slides, the reports, as well as a recording of the session over there. And we will send an email to all participants with the links as well. And any other questions, either via the chat or to the breakout session? And if there aren't, feel free to, you can either join the session back, the general session back, or rejoin at 12:30. We look forward to seeing everybody. And a huge thank you to Robert and Ed. We look forward to the afternoon sessions, and we're excited to see the other topics that our Matrix Design Group experts will be sharing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will stop recording now.